You can either perceive the universe as being one with you, as being intrinsically a part of and connected with the universe, or you can perceive the universe as being separate from you and disconnected from you. Without bringing the mind into coherence with the heart, there is no free will. There is only the ego's programs which run you and pretend to be you. If you're living in that duality, that means the ego still has a hold on your mind, right? The programs are still running you. When you live like that, you're going to be canceling out all of the good things you're trying to draw to yourself and create. The ego's programs are all that prevents us from being true to ourselves, because they keep us caught in these patterns of reactivity, defensiveness, and victimhood. Now, a big part of what we talk about and teach here in 40U is heart-based consciousness. Another way to look at heart-based consciousness is the term mind-heart coherence, which has become more popular in recent years. And I want to talk about mind-heart coherence today as being authenticity. When your mind is finally coherent with your heart, when the heart is actually leading the way and the mind is following the heart rather than trying to lead. That's the joining of our two polarities, masculine and feminine. And at the retreat last weekend, the first 2 days were solely dedicated to these two polarities, these first two disciplines. Know thyself, masculine; love thyself, feminine. Those two merge together as mind-heart coherence, and mind-heart coherence is authenticity. So if I have to give you a definition for authenticity, and you guys know that I love a good working definition, I would say that authenticity is simply the ability to be completely true to yourself at all times, regardless of the circumstance or the action of others. The ability to be fully true to yourself, regardless of the actions of others or whatever the circumstance may be. That's authenticity. And we all know that that's not as easy as it sounds, right? Sounds pretty easy. Be true to myself all the time? Yeah, sure, no problem. But when we try to do it, we run into a lot of difficulties. And those difficulties we call inauthenticity. So why do we become inauthentic is a good question to ask. Why do we deviate from our natural, true, authentic expression? So let's talk about where inauthenticity actually comes from. Now, in the theme of the two polarities, we know that because the universe is comprised of just two opposite forces, there are only two possible thought systems in the universe. So if unity is one way to perceive the universe or perceive reality, then the opposite must therefore be separation. And so as we study the universe, we find this to be absolutely true. You can either perceive the universe as being one with you, as being intrinsically a part of and connected with the universe, or you can perceive the universe as being separate from you and disconnected from you. But there is no third option. There's literally just two ways to perceive the universe. So we could call it the thought system of separation, which is that of the ego, and the thought system of unity, which is the way that God thinks and perceives. So the thought system of separation is the kingdom of the ego, right? That it's the territory that the ego rules with an iron fist, and there's no escaping the ego's tyranny under that thought system. In the ego's thought system, death reigns supreme over life, doesn't it? Life appears to be just a short gasp of breath between birth and death. A short flickering in the darkness for a few moments and then quickly extinguished by the great void of death. Death, the death scythe, cloaked, hooded figure, is the god of the ego's universe. But standing in perfect opposition to separation is the thought system of unity. And in this thought system, eternal life is all that there is, and there exists nothing apart from it or outside of it. In the thought system of unity, life is infinite, has no beginning or end, and therefore life reigns supreme over death. In this thought system, death is not an ending, but merely a transition from one life to the next. Right? Everything that exists is alive, and that which is not alive does not exist. So this is the philosophy of unity, is that unity, life, eternity, oneness, infinity, this is all that exists, and nothing outside of it is real. Because if life could be extinguished by death, right? If the ego's concept of death was true, and death eventually wipes out life, life gets to enjoy a couple brief fleeting moments of temporary experience as a human, and then annihilated forever. Death comes to take its final reward. Okay, if that's true, if death could extinguish life, then new life could not be born. Right? Life is a principle. So because we always see new life being born into the universe, we have all the evidence we need to know that life is an eternal principle without end. Death has no stain upon it. Death does not even contact it. So life transcends the concept of death. Unity, not separation, is the fundamental nature of the universe. The very fact that you're alive right now, in the eternal now moment, means that you are life eternal. You see that? You can't have a principle. A principle is something earlier than yourself. You don't have a principle, you are a principle. So you don't have consciousness, you are consciousness. You don't have life, there's no you who then possesses life, subject, object. There's just life, and you are life. So if the ego's system, thought system of separation was true, if everything in the universe was separate, then no life could exist. It's an impossible universe, right? The cosmos would be an absurd place where flowers refuse the embrace of the soil. Planets fly away from their orbit around their stars. Two human beings could never understand each other because their minds would have to be completely separate. Such a universe could not exist. It's an inherent contradiction. Life thrives on connection and interdependence, not separation. The fact that there is life means separation does not exist. Reality is proof of the truth. So, this is the essence of unity, right? It's the silent, invisible force that weaves the fabric of creation, holds everything together. But nevertheless, the human mind, the feeble, puny human intellect that barely perceives a tiny fraction of reality, sees everything mistakenly as being separate, disconnected, alone, threatening, etc. It doesn't perceive oneness. And so because the human mind at the third density stage of consciousness doesn't perceive oneness yet, it has to invent or create a self who can cope with this cold, threatening universe that it thinks it sees. So the ego is the mental self we create in order to protect ourselves from a reality we secretly fear. Hope you guys didn't miss that one. I'll say it again. The ego is a mental self we create in order to protect ourselves from a reality we secretly fear. If you don't fear reality, you don't need an ego. Do you see that? The ego is a response to the fear of separateness. It's the self that stands in between the gap of me and the scary universe and puts up a protecting hand. No, I'll be in control. I'll control life. I'll find my outcomes. I'll make my way. I'm the doer. I'm the separate self. We invent the ego to protect ourselves. So the ego is purely a set of conditioned mental programs, right? These mental programs are designed to help us cope with the dangers and the unpredictability of life. That's what all conditioning is for, isn't it? So we might call this conditioned self of mental programs the personality. And I use that term loosely because I don't mean anything at all that comprises your expression of self. That's not what I mean. I'm using the word personality in a very specific way. The egoic personality, the set of mental programs that are running you and pretending to be you that you have not disentangled yourself from. The mental programs that have captured your free will and run you against your will, recreating the same outcomes and patterns that you hate and detest and that cause your suffering. That's the ego, and that's what inauthenticity is. It's working against your own best interest, right? Why do we do it? Because we've created a false mental self to protect ourselves from a false, scary universe. We're shrouded in illusion, right? We don't see reality clearly yet. And so there's a Russian philosopher, famous Russian philosopher named Gurdjieff, who had this kind of distinction of personality versus essence. And he would talk about how the personality is the conditioned, outward-facing egoic self, while the essence is like the unconditioned being. And Gurdjieff said that most people have a very, very strong personality and very little connection to their essence. And that it's very rare that you sometimes will meet a being who has very strong connection to their essence and their personality takes a back seat. They have that calm, poised presence, no need to prove themselves, no defensiveness, just grounded presence, kindness, openness, vulnerability. That's the essence that shines through the personality. And so this is why we can't truly be authentic when we're living from ego consciousness, because the ego steals our free will and siphons it into its mental programs to keep itself strong, right? We can't respond to our life authentically because we're too busy reacting to life from the ego's programs. Fight, flight, freeze, We become irritable, we become predictable, we become easily triggerable. The essence of who we are can't shine through the form when our free will is bound up in the ego's mental programs. So how do we get out of this mess, you guys? Who can save us? Who's the superhero coming in with the big red cape? Yes, very good, Nimesh. All true answers. God, I am, love, synonyms, same thing. But love is what I'm getting at. The heart is what I'm getting at. The heart is the essence of who we are, while the mind is the personality of who we are. The heart has never forgotten oneness and unity. The heart has never forgotten the oneness and the unity of life. The heart can't fear anything because it only knows the eternity and the infinity of life, the oneness of all things. That's the only reality the heart knows. All I see is oneness, says the heart. But the heart has been, let's say, put out of business by the mind, by the ego. And so now we must hire the heart to become like the new CEO of the mind. It's a very good analogy, actually. You can think about the ego like a selfish CEO of a business who, he pays his employees as little money as possible, minimum wage salary, and he takes 90% of the company's profits for himself. Living in this big luxurious mansion on his high hill with silk sheets and a silk robe, eating caviar, drinking wine. That's the ego, right? While all of its programs work to get it more energy, to get it more currency. The programs just work like a slave all day long to hijack your attention. So when the heart gets employed as the new CEO, the ego gets very threatened and very intimidated because it starts to watch as the heart goes through each of the ego's employees' mental programs and reconditions them, gives them a new position, a new title, begins to heal and transmute that energy into love, openness, kindness, gratitude. And so just like a billionaire business tycoon who purchases a struggling business to improve it and remodel it, we have to hire the heart to be the CEO of the mind, right? To run the mind's business and kick the ego out of the CEO position. We must make the heart the CEO of the mind. And this requires a lot of new policies to be instituted, right? New company policies, new vision for the company, new branding, everything, the whole shebang. But the heart, being unconditionally loving, doesn't fire anybody from the mind. It simply trains and converts all the ego's programs into perfect reflections of the new company branding. And let's call that company branding the law of one, the law of love. Love and oneness is the new company motto, and the ego does not like it and kicks and screams from its high castle, while the heart just keeps converting all the new programs, all the new employees to serve the heart's will rather than the mind's will. So when we put the heart in charge of the mind, the thought system of unity begins to clean up the mind and make it a servant of the heart. The mind, or the heart, doesn't kill the mind, right? I know that's a term that's often used in Advaita Vedanta. Kill your mind, kill your mind. It's just a concession to the idea that your mind is a set of programs. The mind itself, that organism in the brain that perceives and thinks and senses and interacts with the world of physicality, doesn't need to be killed. It's a beautiful gift. It needs to be converted, right? There needs to be a firing and hiring of a new CEO. We kick the ego out, we hire the heart instead. And then we teach the mind how to be trained under the heart in the ways of the heart, which is the thought system of unity. And this is how we establish mind-heart coherence. We continually teach the mind the ways of the heart. Because remember, the mind doesn't know the way of the heart. It has to be taught. Only the heart knows the way of the heart, the way of love. So the mind will be trained, but slowly, over time. All those patterns have to be requalified, right? And that's a big practice we talk about here. We're requalifying the ego's programs to convert its employees into our employees. We want to make the mind work for us, not for the ego. So this is mind-heart coherence, right? Another working definition for you. Mind-heart coherence is to make the will of the mind become subservient to the will of the heart. To overtake the will of the mind with the will of the heart. That's mind-heart coherence. Then the mind becomes the most humble servant of love. And the mind is even more active than it was before, possibly, but in a very different way. It's processing and analyzing how to compute the most loving responses through the body unit. It's acting as the intermediary between the heart and the authentic expression. The mind becomes the channel, the conduit that allows the loving energy of the heart to flow through the mind and express itself through the body. Kindness, generosity, service to others, joy, gratitude, patience. These are the qualities that flow out of us as the mind comes into coherence with the heart. When the mind is out of coherence, the energy of the heart can't get through. All that gets through are the programs of the ego mind. So again, how do we do this? How do we make this conversion? How do we establish this coherence? The answer is, very simply, by checking in with our heart as often as possible. That's how we retrain the mind to obey the will of the heart. That's how we hire the CEO of the heart rather than the ego, is we continually check in with our heart as often as we can remember to do so. We ask questions like, how does my heart feel about this decision? We ask questions like, how does my heart feel about that response? We learn to wait a moment before we respond to people. We learn to wait a moment before we choose how to respond to the present moment, because we want to give the heart that time, that space to come in. When we're quick to react to life, we're not giving the heart time to compute the response we truly desire. The program is the one that's getting triggered. The program is responding. We're giving energy to the ego's programs. But when we learn how to take space within ourselves, how to take pause continually, and literally train this before every single action or reaction you can possibly be aware of. Before you do anything, pause, take a moment. How does my heart feel about this? And then if it feels good, go on. If it doesn't, ask the question, what is my heart trying to tell me right now? Where might I be stepping out of alignment with the law of one? So, your spouse says something, you feel a bit offended by it, you want to respond with a passive-aggressive comment to kind of subtly let them know you don't like what they just said. And the comment comes up and you're like, what? Before I say that, let me check in. How does my heart feel about that comment? And then you feel, no, that's not resonating. That doesn't feel loving to say that. I feel like that's my ego trying to prove itself, to be right, to get its way, to be on top. You detect that energy and you say, I forgive that, never mind. And you don't give in to the program. You're hiring new heart-based employees every time you do that, and the business begins to shift to the new branding, the new vision, the law of one. So since your heart is where your true will comes from, this is how we gain our free will back from the ego and its programs. Without bringing the mind into coherence with the heart, there is no free will, right? There is only the ego's programs which run you and pretend to be you, creating all of your karma and your suffering in these cycles. That doesn't mean we don't have moments where we step into the heart and then back into the ego's programs. There's a lot of oscillation. What I mean is, if you can only sometimes be in the heart, is that really free will? Do you truly have your full will back yet? No. I say if I don't have all of it, I have none of it. It's as good as if I had none of it. I want all of my free will back. I want to always have the ability to choose my preference in every moment. I want to always have the ability to express myself truthfully in every moment, regardless of the situation. So when we check in with the heart, we're creating a new pattern interruption. And that's the important part. Checking in with the heart is a pattern interrupt, which invites the heart to take charge of the mind and begins to train the mind to always consider the will of the heart before it acts. That's the real purpose of having this kind of a practice, is I have to train my mind like literally a new company policy, right? I have to train my mind to always consider the will of the heart before it acts. Like the heart's the boss, I can't do anything unless the heart says I can. So what does the heart say about this? No? Selfish response? Okay, then I throw it away. What do you want me to say, heart? You're always checking in, coming from love, obeying the law of one, doing no harm to any living being. That's the law of one. So only the heart knows and perceives the law of one. The mind doesn't see it. The mind only sees separateness, because that's the ego's thought system. And so because it's never your will to suffer, and because all suffering comes from violating the law of one, then we can say with absolute certainty that your true will is to never violate the law of one. That's why A Course in Miracles says, hey, your will and God's will are one. There aren't two wills. It's not like you have a will and then also God has one in addition, and then you try to get in alignment with it. No, there's just God's will, and you're confused and wandering in the forest looking for what your will is. Where did it go? I lost it. There's only one. It's God's will. So maybe you need to stop trying to find my will and just obey God's will. And as you obey God's will, you start to learn, oh my goodness, this really is my will. I really do find the greatest pleasure from obeying God, from pleasing God, from doing what God wills. It's the greatest form of fulfillment. And we find that to be true as we obey it. And so never deviating from the law of one is your will at all times. And if you don't know that, it's simply because you don't fully have the awareness to see it yet. You may not fully realize that obeying the law of one is your absolute will in every moment, but that doesn't change the fact that it is. Why? Because every time you violate it, it creates suffering, and you don't like suffering, and you want to escape the suffering. So the escape from suffering is obedience to God's law, the law of one. And so authenticity then, now we've come full circle, authenticity is the product of living in alignment with the law of one. And that's not an easy thing to see, right? Most people would see authenticity a bit differently than that. And they might say, oh, authenticity is just being loving to yourself and letting yourself express because you care about yourself, you know? That's true, but where does all that love come from? It comes from your awareness of the law of one. So I dare not reject myself, harm myself, or belittle myself, because I am also one with all. I am also God's child who is equally valid as anything else in the universe. So everything, including me, gets equal love from my heart. So that's why I'm authentic, because I'm aware of the way reality actually is. I'm aware that all is one, and so I honor everything as if it was the creator. And so I'm always myself, and I always allow others to be themselves. I don't judge and try to change people, nor do I try to change myself. I show up how I am right now. And if something out of alignment comes out of me, I see it, I forgive it, I correct it, I get back into alignment. The more in alignment I am, the more authentic I can be. So this is why the word personality is important, because as Ra teaches, there are 3 disciplines for the personality. To train the egoic personality to become the perfect reflection of the divine personality, the God self that you truly are. To express that self, we have to get rid of all the programs that cover it up. And so the way we do that is by bringing the mind into coherence with the heart. So these 3 disciplines are know thyself, love thyself, become the creator. For authenticity, we have to have these 2 at a minimum, masculine and feminine. That's mind-heart coherence. Why do we need self-awareness and self-love to be authentic? Because if we're not self-aware, we can't be authentic, because we're not aware of the patterns that are running us yet. We think I'm really the one who gets easily irritated and never gets my way, and all of those false stories about myself, those are the ego's programs, and I keep acting them out. Until I'm aware of that, I can't be authentic. So self-awareness is critical for authenticity. But in addition to that, there's no way I can be authentic if I don't love myself. Because if I don't love any part of myself, you can guarantee I'm going to conceal that and hide that aspect of me from the world. I'm going to reject that part of me. I'm going to try to hide it from other people, which is inauthenticity. And don't you find it interesting that you can meet somebody for the first time at a party or an event or something, and if that person is being fake, if that person's not being who they really are, you don't have a clue what this person's real personality is like yet. You've never met them before. But nevertheless, you know right away when they're being fake, don't you? It's just an inherent ability we all have. When someone's being fake, we just know it. We feel it, we sense it. And we say, I don't like that person. They're like putting on a mask, you know? It doesn't feel good to be around them. How do you know they're putting on a mask if you've never seen their true face? Because the heart knows, right? The heart is sensitive to the law of one, and when someone else is deviating from the law of one, we can feel it. The heart can feel it. So self-awareness and self-love are critical for authenticity. And once we have our masculine, feminine, mind, heart polarities in balance, we step into our power to become the creator. We step into our authentic self. Our authentic destiny and purpose can now shine forth.